we start, I want to just throw something out in case anybody's interested. I think I mentioned this before. I work with a couple of organizations, a couple of music organizations. And I have this idea, I've been working on sort of thinking about engagement ideas. And one of my ideas is to coursify them. In other words, if the idea is that you get a more committed audience, a more committed community, if you get them to participate more, if you get them to invest. I look at them as investors rather than patrons. And so the idea was building on this idea of book clubs and how popular book clubs are, and also on MOOCs, the Massive Open Online Courses. We're going to coursify two festivals, one at Carnegie Hall and the Ojai Festival. And it'll be 12-week courses starting in the spring. I am looking for some help, some intern help for the spring semester, if anybody's interested in it. It's basically creating courses around what these festivals will be, and there'll be a new one every 2 weeks, and we want to engage a whole lot of people. And I think it's sort of an interesting experiment in how do you turn a festival of events into kind of a lifestyle kind of investment in engagement. So if anybody's interested, just email, shoot me an email. It helps if you know something about classical music, because that's what they're going to be about. But if not, that's fine too. So, okay.
And you can get credit.
Yeah, and you can get credit
from course.
I know it may still be conceptual, but what mainly would the interns be doing?
You will, specifically, I'm not sure yet, but part of it is we're making up something new. And so we got to gather up a lot of material, we got to think about how we're interfacing with it. So there'll be some grunt work involved, but you'll learn a lot about the thinking about doing something like this. And I think it actually applies, all of it actually will apply to thinking about stories and pitching stories, and it has, I think, a lot of journalistic applications. So anyway, so I just tossed that out. Thank you all for the pitches. Really interesting. A lot of really interesting ideas to go through. One thing that was kind of interesting was the ways in which some of you pitched. Some of you actually pitched themes rather than stories. Some of you pitched sort of like big sort of ideas with lots of things in them rather than stories. And so you've got to, when you're pitching a story, we all have to pitch stories, right? That's how you get work. That's whether you're employed at a publication or a news organization, you've got to be really good at being able to set the hook, right? A pitch is just setting the hook. A pitch is a way of asking a question that your editor or somebody wants to know the answer to, right? So think about how you did your pitch, and does it all boil down to asking that question, setting the hook for that question? You want to give just enough information so that it makes me curious about wanting to know more. But ultimately, it all leads to what is that question that this story is going to answer that I just have to find out, okay? And some of you were really good about that. It was concise, it was really clear, it really kind of said, and others it was, you know, I could see 2 or 3 stories out of this, but I'm not sure what exactly you're getting to. So it's really that art of the pitch, of being able to really get somebody's attention so that they buy something. Pitch is basically a sales pitch. Sales pitch. And
the other thing is that, so Reed is here, Reed Johnson, and I'm just acknowledging them, acknowledging everybody. So when you're pitching, and you're pitching to people who have the ability to say yes or no to your story, make it easy for them to read it and get it fast.
Yeah, how many pitches do you get in a week?
Drew had something to say about this.
Oh, how many pitches do I get a week? Well, I've got 30 writers, so I'm getting, and they write 2 stories for me a month, so I'm getting, I don't know,
30 pitches
30 pitches a week.
Yeah. And how do you sort through them? What grabs you?
For me, with the contributors that we have, I always tell them to give me the elevator pitch, something that is about, you know, if you're standing with somebody for about 1.5 minutes and you just can tell them what's going on, what's happening, that's usually the best way to do it. Include the assets, like who are you going to interview, or what kind of images are going to be involved, things like that, just to make it so that for all of us who have a lot of pitches coming into us, that we can get through it pretty quickly and get to the base idea. And it's always kind of a good idea to start with like the first sentence has to be something pretty catchy, but also boiling it down to that essence of the story. You know, if you should be able to tell what your story is in 1 sentence. You know, like if you're in the elevator, you see an editor and they're like, "What are you working on?" And then you tell them that in like a couple sentences. So that's kind of like with having so many of my contributors, of our contributors, we definitely have to keep them very concise.
Some stories seem impossible to boil down into a sentence or so. But my experience is that if you can't do that, it probably means you don't really yet know what that story is. And the other aspect of it, which is also something that we noticed out of the pitches, is that some of them are not necessarily practically doable, right? It's sort of like, oh, we're going to do this and this and this and this, but wait, actually, that might be too hard to do or too ambitious to do, right? You also have to give a sense when you pitch something that is actually a possible thing to do, because you're giving some idea of how you're going to be able to practically do it. So, okay, so today what we want to do is we want to start, it's sort of exciting because we're going to start to see some shape out of this. You each have 3 pages, which I have boiled down based on all of the discussion and everything that I've been seeing. I've tried to boil down each project into a sort of an essence here. And even some of them are a little bit still long, but we're getting there. And into this, we need to figure out what are the essential stories we need to tell each of these projects with. Okay. So just to sort of recap in the kind of where we are in this process, right? First, we started educating ourselves for what this is all building to is we're trying to figure out what are the questions we need to ask. Right? Before we can figure out what the answers we need to get, we need to figure out what the right questions are. What are the provocative questions, right? So this has been a process by which we're trying to figure out what are the questions, what are the interesting, what is the thing that we're trying to do. So first we went looking for data, just to describe lots of things, what we thought would relate to these ideas. Then we went looking for who's talking about these issues. What kind of studies are there? Who's really participating in conversations? Then out of that, this last week, we've gotten more specific and talked about specific stories. Here's the story I see that sort of tells a piece of this story. Okay? Now what I want to do is to back up just a little bit and draw kind of a representation of each project so that we can start figuring out what the stories are that we need to place in there, and where in those some of the stories that you pitched this week fit, and are we missing anything? Okay, we are missing some things, but we can't really tell until we start plotting it out. Now, we are not going to choose definitively the stories that you will be working on today. That will happen over the next couple of days. We're going to get input from the fellows, from the media partners, and there'll be some discussion online, and we'll get there next week. okay? So don't worry today about, okay, I gotta walk out here and here's my story and this is what I'm gonna be doing for the next 2 weeks. Your ideas after we have this conversation may change, or your pitches may evolve a little bit after we talk about this, okay? Because part of what I'm trying to do is make the lens long, then bring it back. Make it long and bring it back, so that we're always aware of what the larger context of what we're trying to do is, and what are the little pieces of that, okay? So let's start with, so what I'd like to do today is to spend, let's see, it's 10:15. We got about 45 minutes on each story, on each project, okay? And we've got 3 sort of grid papers here. And let's start with arts education. If we boil arts education down, one of the themes that I saw out of all of this is that it boils down to access, right? Is that traditionally the way this story is told is about decline of arts education. We're surmising that, yes, that's true in one way, but in fact, there might be a correlative rise in arts education, how people are getting their arts education, how they're learning about the arts, how they're sharing about the arts is evolving in other ways, right? So, if we think back to that original kind of pyramid that I drew, so we had the bottom, we had some sort of data thing, some sort of discussion thing in the middle, and then the top, trying to draw context. And so we've got something sort of like this, right? Into the bottom, what we need to do, okay, don't laugh at my drawing. It's pretty bad, okay? Into the bottom, we have to think about how we're going to quantify things, right? So one of the things that we got to quantify is what? Public education, right? So that's kind of one box here. So how else is arts education delivered? It's through institutions, right? Through professional education, right? We've got somebody looking at professional education.
Are you talking about Art Center?
There's also community. And then you've got artists sharing, artists teaching. Am I missing anything major?
What about online or virtual?
Yeah.
So online or virtual could be artists doing it, it could be, right, so it's sort of encompassed in that. That's another way of sort of dividing it up.
Yeah.
Are we differentiating institutions and professional education?
Institutions, I'm thinking arts institutions like the LA Philharmonic or MoCA or whatever, as opposed to private, yeah.
Well, we're talking about private. Are we going to be exhaustive? Because a lot of arts education is, you pay for it privately.
Yeah,
So
I'm including that as well, right? What we're looking for is what are the ways in which people are, what are all the ways in which people are getting access to arts education, right?
What about family?
Could that fit into community?
Not my family.
yeah,
Does that fit in with
really
artist
different birds.
teachers?
Yeah, I was.
Does that fit in with
Yeah.
artist teachers in a way?
There's also a good handful, sorry, Helena, there's also a good handful of people that homeschool and that include that in there.
And I was talking to a carpenter who said that most of his colleagues have learned their skills from their parents, from their
Right.
fathers and mothers.
That's a story we haven't really talked about.
Mhm.
But so many of the best artists in it, they get that initial bump from having a parent who does it.
Who doesn't?
Same as any?
That's right. So the challenge at this level is that these are all in effect sort of data sets, right? Just sort of like we got to figure out whether there's more or less and how. Like for instance, public schools, I think it's fairly easy. We can go and look at budgets, we can go look at curriculum, we can track it over a number of years, right? For arts institutions, we can look at, you know, what did institutions offer 20 years ago as opposed to now. It gets much muddier, much more muddy if you start to look at, for instance, private instruction. Although there are probably teacher associations, so you could say, you know, 20 years ago there were 2,600 teachers now of piano, now there are, you know, 1,400 or whatever. I mean, there may be a way of quantifying it. There may not, right? Some of this we're not going to be able to find. But what we're trying to do is we're sort of trying to define the territory a little bit so that we have a way, sort of a foundation to lay, right? Are we missing anything else?
You know, we haven't talked about it all, and it might be a different story, but somehow I think it's related, and that would be the amount of leisure time that people have.
Okay, so hold that thought, because
Okay.
I think that belongs in a different part of it. That's sort of where we start to explain the changes that are happening in delivery.
Okay.
That's a perfect story to sort of fit in there.
Good.
Okay. So if we then think of, this as the journalistic function of gathering stuff, like putting things together, defining the territory. The classic definition of a critic is define the territory, right? Then walk the perimeter of the territory, come back and report the things that are new, the things that are unusual, and start drawing context between them, right? That's sort of classically what a critic does, right? In this case, what we're doing is we're defining the territory, and we're trying to make an attempt at measurement here, something on which to base things, okay? So then if we look at, so this is the gathering part. Then we've got what is essentially a curating function, right? We don't want to reinvent some stuff that people are already doing. Right? This is also the level at which we have the best, I believe, the best opportunity of interacting with people who are doing this or interested in this, right? What's the fastest way to get the attention of a blogger? Mention them in a post, right?
Troll them.
Because they're going to come back. They're going to come back, because as soon as you mention somebody, they come back and check you out, right? So you want the attention of the community, go out and mention them, comment on something that they do, draw attention to them. So the way you get attention for yourself is not by saying, pay attention to me. The way you get attention for yourself is looking outwards and paying attention to somebody else. That's what brings the attention back, right? People respond when you notice what they're doing, when you make them visible in some way, right? So the curating function is actually where the juice of where we're going to get our audience from, okay? The curating function also is a way of involving lots of people in this conversation. Because what you're doing is you're going out and you're finding the experts, you're finding the people who are already having these conversations, who are playing in this space. It's arrogant to assume that we could walk in here, you know, in September, start working on this in September, and by November we're going to be the experts on something because we just talked to a bunch of people, when there are people who have been doing this for 30 years, right? So we don't want to make that mistake of holding ourselves up as the experts on this. So here is where we start pulling in things. So we want to find out who's talking. That's the essential part. So into this part could go studies, right? Into this part could go what? What?
Teachers groups.
Teachers groups? Okay.
Policymakers,
Policymakers? Yep.
parents,
Advocacy groups.
Teachers? And they're each going to have a point of view on this, right?
Think tanks, foundations.
A self-serving point of view in many cases.
And see, that's where, so our role as journalists, you know, it's just like everybody's talking about, well, what do you need journalists for, right? We need journalists to gather up stuff that's important to make a case for something, i.e. research. We need journalists to sort out who's talking about stuff and what's worth paying attention to and being able to vet it in some kind of way, right? And lastly, at the top, we need journalists who make hypotheses based on all of this that they see and start to make contextualization, right? Contextualize all of this kind of stuff. Make a premise, be provocative. What are the things that you've learned? What do you think is the truth here? Right? So, but still at this level, are we missing stuff? I'm sure we're missing lots, but this is kind of where we want to put that kind of stuff.
Well, if you're talking about who's talking, I mean, you're also talking about journalists, you're talking about, who's talking about arts education? I mean,
Yeah.
you're also talking about artists,
Yep.
teachers.
And students.
And students, and journalists.
So when you think about curating conversations,